Hi everyone, I'm Nadia, and in today's video, my mom and I are making geode resin trays with smaller geode resin pieces. The first thing we're doing is cutting out some contact paper, which we'll use to trace our molds. Once both molds are placed onto the paper, I used a marker to trace them. And we placed down some rocks just to keep the paper in place since it was curling up. I'll be working on the round geode shape and my mom will be working in this irregular shape on the right. Then my mom gets our silicone ready to use. I'll have all of the products that you see in this video listed in my description below, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. My mom starts to follow her outline with the silicone before realizing that she would prefer to draw out her geode shapes first. So she gives the silicone to me since I would rather come up with my design on the spot. I draw out smaller geode shapes with more space in between, where my mom draws out larger geode shapes with less space in between. Once I'm done, I hand the silicone to my mom, and she does a much better job of applying it because she's making sure to press it down against the contact paper so that there's no space, which could lead to leakage. Because I didn't do the best job of this, I start to use a wooden stick to help push down the silicone and make sure that there's no gaps. My mom is also applying very thick layers, which overall is a bit more sturdy than mine. We're also making sure that there's enough height in our silicone so that we'll be able to pour properly. Then my mom steps in to help me and puts in a nice thick layer of the silicone. It can get a little tiring using the silicone and may be hard on your wrist, which is why my mom stepped in for me since she's stronger than I am. We come back the next day once we're sure that the silicone has dried and start to mix in our part A and part B resin together. We each mixed up our resin separately, and in this video we're using Epoxy Blast B20 Jewel Cast by Depon, which is a 2:1 ratio by weight. I'll have a discount code in my description if you want to give them a try. Once our resin is mixed in well for several minutes, we start to separate it into smaller cups to add in our pigments. We're going to be going for two completely different looks. I'm aiming for a gray gold geode, while my mom will be doing a purple and gold geode. The first pigment that my mom uses is this purple transparent pigment by J. Diction. And I start to mix in my first pigment, which is just Resin's pigment paste in the shade Titanium White. I always mix the pigment in the container first before adding a small amount into my cup of resin. Then my mom goes ahead and also mixes in Titanium White. My next pigment is this metallic powder in the shade Oro Rico by Resin Pro. And I like to use this pigment because the gold floats to the top. And my mom's next pigment is this beautiful violet mica powder from J. Diction. The more she mixes it, we realize that it has a blue hue to it, which ends up looking very beautiful in her geode. Then I mix in just Resin's aluminum while my mom mixes in J. Diction's mica powder in the shade Datura. In the same cup with my aluminum pigmented resin, I'm also adding in J. Diction's mica powder in the shade Silver Gray. In a clear cup of resin, I start mixing in broken glass pieces, and my mom adds in white mica powder by Resin Pro. In that same cup with my broken glass, I add in some gold leaf flakes. And in that same cup where my mom mixed in her white mica powder, she adds in DuPont's Heisenberg Blue Pearl, which adds a beautiful shimmer. And I was inspired by my mom and added in Luxury Ghost Gold Pearl into all of my cups for a nice gold shimmer. And now we mix away, making sure that everything is mixed in well. And now we're ready to start pouring. I start off with my white pigmented resin, where my mom starts off with her transparent purple pigmented resin. We're not doing every geode the same, so we mix up the patterns in which we pour the pigments. I take my silver pigmented resin and pour alongside my white pigmented resin, while my mom takes her white mica powder pigmented resin and starts pouring around the edges. Then I pour my gold pigmented resin right alongside my silver pigmented resin, and my mom pours her darker purple pigmented resin around the remainder edges of her molds, and also adds it into the mold in the center. And I add in my center detail into the 3 molds where I poured. My mom then pours her white pigment paste resin, and I add in more of the Oro Rico powder into my cups to make it more gold. Then my mom switches to pouring the white mica powder pigmented resin, and I start pouring my silver pigmented resin around the edges of my molds. Next, my mom pours her Datura pigmented resin, and I switch to my gold pigmented resin right alongside my silver resin. And from here we continue pouring and rotating our different pigmented resins. My mom pours clear resin directly in the center into all of her molds. Then I pour the clear resin directly into the center while my mom continues to circle around her molds with her different pigmented resins. And I also circled several times around my molds with my different pigmented resins. I continued to add in my center details since a lot of the broken glass sunk to the bottom of the cup. My mom uses a heat gun to help promote some movement within her molds. Then she continues to circle around her molds with her white and Datura pigmented resin. She uses a torch gun to pop any air bubbles, and we're being extra careful with the torch gun and moving it very quickly so we don't burn the silicone or the resin. She mixes in gold leaf flakes with the broken glass pieces to be her center detail and carefully applies it into the center of her molds. And I added in a little bit more gold into my center. And here we are the next day demolding. I did have maybe a tiny bit of leakage on mine. As you can tell, the edges aren't perfect, but that can be easily fixed. My mom nicely places hers back into place where they were, where I, on the other hand, did not. Here we're checking out the top and the bottom side to see which side we prefer. My mom ends up using the top side, where I did a mixture of the top and the bottom. Here's a clip of my mom sanding her edges with this tool, which makes sanding very easy. And I'll also have a similar tool linked in my description. I didn't mind that my edges were too rough, so I did some minor touch-ups by cutting off some pieces with scissors and did a little bit of filing by hand. I placed the geodes in their correct spot and started to clean my mold with some tape. Once my mold was clean, I then transferred them into the mold. And I used this Deco Color gold marker to add a gold trim just on the top since the sides won't be too visible. I cleaned my mom's geodes from sanding with an alcohol wipe and then also added on their gold trim. Then we start mixing in our resin once more, and again we're using the same resin that we previously used. After we mix for several minutes, we separate it into a smaller cup. I start to add in these very small glass pieces, and my mom starts to add in white mica powder by Resin Pro into her cup. Next, I start to add in this beautiful metallic gold deco sand into my cup. And I also add in these medium-large glass pieces. And again, I'm using Deepond's Luxury Gold Ghost Pearl to add a beautiful shimmer. So my mom and I are also doing this step in different ways, and I would recommend the way that my mom is doing it. So I had already placed in all of my geode pieces into the mold, and I'm going to be pouring around them, while my mom first mixed in white mica powder into her resin and will be pouring in a very thin layer. She uses a silicone makeup brush to help spread the resin to the edges and make sure that the whole area of the mold is covered. She uses a torch gun to pop any air bubbles. I continue pouring and use a wooden stick to help make some adjustments. And my mom starts to add in her geode pieces into her thin layer of resin. The reason I would recommend doing it the way that my mom is because this way you're avoiding any trapped air that gets caught below the geode pieces. You'll see later in the video that I ended up having little crates below some of the geode pieces because of the air that was trapped. Now that all of her geode pieces are in place, she starts to mix in her small glass pieces into her resin. And into her same cup, she mixes in Deepond's Luxury Gold Ghost Pearl. And she adds in Deepond's 3D Diamond Crystal Flakes. Lastly, she adds in DuPont's Chrome Mirror Gold Flakes, to which I was like, wow, that is so pretty, and I decided to use it as well. And I used a wooden stick to just apply it onto areas of my resin. My mom added a little bit more of the very small glass pieces and mixed it together. And then she poured everything into a plastic bag. Once everything was in the bag, she pushed it down into one corner and with scissors cut off a very small amount so that she'll be able to squeeze it into her mold. If you guys are enjoying this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. It really helps out my channel. And if you're really enjoying this video, consider leaving a super thanks, which will help me to continue to create videos and tutorials for you guys. She used a wooden stick to make adjustments and added more of the diamond flakes and the gold mirror flakes as well. The next day, my mom mixed in her resin once more to do another layer and add in the handles. At this point, I went back into the city where I live, so my mom took it from here. Before pouring, she used a heat gun to heat up the area to get rid of any humidity. Then she poured the resin into each mold. She used a wooden stick to lift up any small particles or fibers that may have gotten into the resin, and also uses the wooden stick to make sure that the resin has reached the edges of the mold. And she uses the torch gun to pop any air bubbles. She placed tape onto the handles to protect them and make sure that she doesn't drip any resin onto them. And she carefully places them into the molds. This particular handle was a little tricky because the surface wasn't completely leveled, so she used a little extra tape to help keep it in place. Then she adds in her handles as well. And here she is the next day demolding. She uses an X-Acto knife to get rid of any lifted edges. Now she's going to be preparing the trays for a top coat, so she flips each tray onto the back and uses these boards to prop them up so that they lay flat. She starts to apply liquid latex, which she put into this ketchup bottle for easy control and to be able to pour it closer to the edge. The liquid latex will protect the bottom side of the trays while doing the top coat out of the mold, so that if any resin flows over the tray, It will cure onto the liquid latex and easily be able to get pulled off the following day instead of the resin getting stuck onto the backside of the tray. She uses a silicone makeup brush to spread the liquid latex to the very edge. Once the liquid latex has dried, she flips the trays over and props them up onto cups. She then mixes in her resin to do the top coat, and she's using DCS resin by Depon. Again, I'll have a discount code to Depon in the description if you're interested. Before she pours onto the tray, she heats up the surface with a heat gun, which will help to evaporate any moisture and humidity. Then she pours onto each tray. She uses a torch gun to pop any air bubbles. And she uses the silicone makeup brush to make sure that the resin has reached the whole area of the tray and push it to the edge. And the next day, she brought them to the beach to remove the liquid latex. Then we added on our gold trim. And here's the final product. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. Follow me on my Instagram, Summer Girl Designs, and my mom's Instagram, Wild Heart Resin Art.